All right, lighting into our next part. This is going to be, again, kind of early 1839, as well as the first portion of what we now call Section 121 of the Doctrine and Covenants. So we will start our year off in 1839 with a receipt from William Smith. It's a good way to start. And $20 is what it's worth. So there you go, $20 receipt. This is followed by a receipt from Sarah Beeman, and then a letter to Heber C. Kimball and Brigham Young on the 16th of January, which directs them as apostles to direct the affairs of the church while the first presidency is in prison. All right, so if you're paying attention, Brigham Young has now just temporarily taken over the affairs of the church, and he will be eventually the successor of Joseph Smith as the president of the church. Anyway, Brigham was the only one left in the Missouri presidency after David Patton dies, and Thomas Marsh has kind of become disaffected, so they're not really trusting him. He's not gone yet, but he's definitely disaffected and not in a position to lead. So, in fact, Thomas B. Marsh, Orson Hyde, William Smith were all out of favor with the church and with Joseph Smith, and David Patton, as we had noted, he was killed in a conflict where he got shot in the bowels. He got shot in the stomach. The Pratt brothers stayed true. However, Parley was in prison and Orson was in St. Louis, and so you got Brigham and Heber. Anyway, interesting here, Brigham and Heber actually ordained John Taylor and John E. Page to the apostleship in Far West. So if you'd like to know, like, Brigham's successor to the presidency of the church, who was John Taylor, was ordained by him to be an apostle. It's kind of interesting to me. They're also commanded to build up the church, keep things going, and it's just really, frankly, it is not a good place for anybody right now. Everybody's having a very hard time. Moving on from this, though, we get a license, we get a receipt, then we get a memorial to the Missouri legislature on the 24th of January. So we are actually 2 months into the state custody of these men, and they are being held unjustly they're claiming that being held unjustly and prejudiced judges are making calls that took away their liberties. So we're not actually sure if all of this language, all of these accusations ever made it to its destination in the legislature, but we do know a very interesting thing here that did change Missouri law, and I would assume to this day. So the historical introduction gives us this. Although it is unclear whether Atchison formally submitted the memorial to the House of Representatives, he did introduce a bill on the 25th of January that amended the existing statute to permit a change of venue from one circuit to another when the people in the circuit where the indictment is found are so prejudiced against the defendant that a fair trial cannot be had. Both the House and the Senate passed the bill, apparently without controversy, and Boggs, Lilburn Boggs, that signed the execution order, signed this into law on the 13th of February, 1839. So in Missouri state law, and I would assume this is the same to this day, if you're going to go to court in the county that you're in, and you're like, look, everybody here hates me so badly, I cannot get a fair trial, you can have a change of venue. So which kind of makes sense, I think. I think almost everybody can do that nowadays. But anyway, that was a new law because of this whole situation. So I thought that was interesting. All right, more receipts, more licenses. And then we get a letter from Edward Partridge on the 5th of March. Talks about land deals that could be favorable to the saints from a man by the name of Isaac Galland, or maybe Galland, but I think it's Galland. This land is in Illinois. So why did I include this? Because this will eventually lead this little church to establish a community in a place called Commerce, which they later name Nauvoo, Illinois. So this is land deals, eventually the last home of Joseph Smith and his final burying place. So kind of an interesting letter. It's kind of interesting to know this stuff is coming. Like, it seems, especially at the time, they write it out like it's no big deal, but it turns into like a very, very, very big and consequential deal. So you never know. Like I said, keep your history. Your life is worth remembering. All right, the next one we get is a letter from Don Carlos and William Smith, who were taking care of the Smith family while they were also being displaced. They had to be really careful about how they traveled because of involvements with skirmishes. They didn't want to be arrested, but otherwise they were well and trying to get things settled the best that they could, especially for their parents. Then we get a declaration on the 6th of March, which is really just charges brought up against William McClellan for basically stealing goods from a store that Joseph was partners in and that William sold off. Anyway, I'll just share this from the historical introduction. This is kind of where the persecution of the saints gets a little absurd, a little out of control, in my opinion. It says this. Several sources describe a different scenario in which McClellan ransacked Joseph Smith's home in Caldwell County in early November 1838 when the state militia occupied the county and Joseph Smith was in jail. One observer described McClellan as, quote, the leader of a clan who went about from house to house, plundering the poor saints and insulting both male and female, unquote. According to James Mulholland, who was living with Emma Smith and the Smith children at the time, McClellan entered Joseph Smith's home and stole linen, cashmere, buttons, books, a harness, and various other items. This list aligns with the declaration list of stolen goods that we have here. Phoebe Patton, and this is the widow of David W. Patton, similarly accused McClellan of, quote, plundering and robbing her home after the surrender of arms on November 1st. When Patton asked McClellan why he was acting contrary to law, he allegedly responded that, quote, there is no law now, but mob law. And Bob Law's Law Bomb would have mob law take care of it. Anyway. Not good. Now, this suit that was brought up had to be dismissed because Joseph couldn't show up in court because he was in jail. And shortly after that, he actually escaped custody, but at the time he couldn't make it. So this is bad. Now, there are many accounts of this, of basically former apostles going to the saints' homes and just doing everything they could to take, bed sheets and blankets and just do everything they could to just make them suffer as hard as they can. Whether all that's true or not, again, we can only go on the records that we have, but these people were brutalized quite, I mean, there's very little equal to it in American history. There are equals to it, don't get me wrong, but there's very few that go this far. It's kind of nuts. Anyway, after this, we get a letter from Emma describing being removed from their land, settling with other families. She also describes the sufferings of the saints and the issues they face. She was a lot nicer about it because she knew that people were reading their mail, so it's all kind of generalistic. We get a petition for habeas corpus that gave prisoners the right to see a judge to find out if their incarceration was even legal at all. So that petition is sent out. We get a letter to somebody by the name of Presendia Buell, who wanted to see the prisoners, but she was refused, so Joseph wrote to her instead. And this was a letter instructing on whether to move to Missouri or Illinois. They had that question, and Joseph told her and her family that they should go to Illinois, which, yeah, Missouri is not really the place for you right now. We get a letter to the church on the 20th of March, 1839, and this is where you get the first portion of section 121. So this is in the handwriting of Alexander McCrae and Caleb Baldwin, and I'm going to introduce these people a little bit further in our next part, but that's who's actually writing this down. This letter is written very much, and the next one as well on the 22nd, this is 2 days later. It's kind of like a Pauline epistle, and if you don't know what I mean by that, basically if you look at, if you're reading in the New Testament, starting about, I would say, Romans, all the way to Hebrews, those are written by the Apostle Paul, and he sort of has a style to it, which is kind of like, to all the saints greeting and so forth. You're going to see that kind of language in these letters. So they definitely made them very scriptural in their nature, and they were very much quoting the Bible, if you will, by using that style. Some other versions that we have of this, besides what you see here, is a letter this letter was actually published in the Times and Seasons, and then a copy of it winds up in the manuscript history of the church, which means it shows up in the volumetric history of the church that we have. All right, so historical introduction to this. What are these letters for? So the historical introduction gives us this. As the main body of Latter-day Saints was relocating from Missouri to Illinois and Iowa Territory, Joseph Smith apparently envisioned writing a series of general epistles in March of 1839 to offer guidance and instruction in the wake of the catastrophic changes of the previous year. Further into this, the immediate catalyst for the 20th of March letter was the arrival of Latter-day Saint David W. Rogers the previous evening. Rogers brought the prisoners a packet that contained letters from their families and friends, a letter from Illinois land speculator Isaac Gallon, and the documents and papers sent by the authorities at Quincy. So it's a very long letter. So we'll get into the structure of it a little bit here. Stylistically, the 20th of March letter is reminiscent of the Apostle Paul's epistles in the New Testament. Paul frequently named his companions in opening greetings and utilized the first-person plural voice even when he was the primary author of the letters. In a similar fashion, the 20th of March 1839 letter opens with greetings from Joseph Smith in company with his fellow prisoners. The body of the letter consistently employs the first-person plural we, our, and us, with the exception of one portion presented in the voice of deity. And all the prisoners signed the letter. Joseph Smith was the principal author, although conversations with the other prisoners may have contributed to the letter's ideas and themes. So we get a portion of this, apparently, that is written in the voice of God. We'll get to that in a moment. Following the opening greeting, the epistle contains an extended meditation on the Latter-day Saints' recent sufferings and the prisoners' frustrations in jail. This part of the missive includes a prayer in which Joseph Smith pleads with God to deliver the saints from their oppressors. The subject of the letter appears to shift with the acknowledgement of receiving letters from Edward Partridge, Don Carlos Smith, and Emma Smith, but this narrative actually continues the meditation on the meaning of persecution, revealing that reading the letters dissolved feelings of bitterness and opened Joseph Smith's heart to receive inspiration. Then the voice of the letter transitions from that of the prisoners to that of the Lord, providing an answer to the letter's earlier prayer, explaining the deeper significance of the saints' persecutions and pronouncing judgments against the church's enemies. All right. Further into this, the second part of the letter addresses challenges the church faced in moving forward, such as deciding where the saints should settle. Joseph Smith declined to either approve or reject Isaac Gallon's offer to sell land to the church. Instead, Joseph Smith said that church leaders in Quincy should make that decision in future conferences and should forward minutes of the proceedings to Joseph Smith for approval. The letter also advises the Quincy church leaders to eschew an aspiring spirit that had previously prevailed over milder counsels, causing much suffering and death among the saints. Additionally, the epistle contains counsel on how to seek revelation and guidance. This counsel is followed by strong affirmation that persecution would not hinder the work of God. Like other missives Joseph Smith composed in the Clay County Jail, this letter incorporates multiple biblical allusions. And that's where the majority, by the way, of the footnotes are. They're almost all just scriptural references that we get. So a lot of this, for that reason, I'm reading the historical introduction so as not to have to read just the letter, just for the sake of time. All right. So although the letter's greeting is directed to the church in general and to Partridge in particular, Joseph Smith sent the missive to his wife, Emma, because he wanted her, quote, to have the first reading of it, unquote. In a letter he wrote to her the following day, he informed her, quote, I have sent an epistle to the church, suggesting the epistle had already left the jail. And this one's pretty widely circulated. So the historical introduction concludes, the 20th of March epistle circulated widely among the Latter-day Saints in the months after its arrival in Illinois, as indicated by the extant copies in the handwriting of Partridge and Alfred Perry Rockwood. In addition, the Times and Seasons published an edited version in 1840, extending the letter's circulations to the saints scattered abroad. So about a year later, it shows up in the newspaper. A footnote to this introduction I should probably also read here. It says, near the conclusion of this 20th of March letter, Joseph Smith and his fellow prisoners wrote, quote, we shall continue to offer further reflections in our next epistle, unquote. A short time later, the men wrote another general epistle stating, quote, we continue to offer further reflections to Bishop Partridge and to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, unquote. The prisoners concluded this letter with a note that, quote, we shall continue our reflections in our next. However, the prisoners apparently did not write another letter prior to their departure from the Clay County Jail on the 6th of April of 1839, which I find an interesting date, the 6th of April. All right, so the content and footnotes for this. The letter states this. For human beings, it cannot be found among the heathens. It cannot be found among the nations where kings and tyrants are enthroned. It cannot be found among the savages of the wilderness, yea, and I think it cannot be found among the wild and ferocious beasts of the forest, that a man should be mangled for sport. What does that mean? Footnote 10. David Lewis, a survivor of the Hans Mill massacre on the 30th of October, later stated that vigilante Jacob Rogers used, quote, an old piece of a scythe blade and hacked down and hacked into pieces Latter-day Saint Thomas McBride. So apparently they mutilated dead bodies on top of it. The letter states further into this, and I apologize if this is a little much to hear. There's going to be some pretty nasty things in this episode. But the letter says this. The women are to be violated, robbed of all that they have, their last morsel of substance, and then be violated to gratify the hellish desires of the mob, and finally left to perish with their helpless offspring clinging around their necks. Footnote 11 for this says, violated was a 19th century euphemism for sexual assault or rape. Several individuals reported that anti-Mormon vigilantes harassed and raped Latter-day Saint women during the 1838 conflict. And I will also mention, just in a reading of the history of the church, they would force these women's children to watch, and they would strap them to the benches of their own churches. Pretty nasty stuff. So then after this, we get what is now called the beginning of section 121. So I'm going to give you a kind of leading up into this in the letter. So here's what the letter says. They practice these things upon the saints who have done them no wrong, who are innocent and virtuous, who love the Lord their God and are willing to forsake all things for his Christ's sake. These things are awful to relate, but they are verily true. It must needs be that offenses come, but woe to them by whom they come. O God, where art thou? And where is the pavilion that covereth thy hiding place? How long shall thy hand be stayed, and thine eye, yea, thy pure eye, behold from the eternal heavens the wrongs of thy people and of thy servants? And then it goes on from there. So this is the situation. People are being murdered and dismembered, hacked to pieces while they're alive, raped in front of their children. That's that children clinging on their necks bit. And that's where the outcry comes of, oh God, where art thou? So just leading up to why this language in section 121, this is why. Now, a little further into this, which is interesting to me as well, is they actually tried to escape by digging their way out of this prison. So we get this. Unfortunately for us, the timber of the wall being very hard, our auger handles gave out and hindered us longer than we expected. We applied to a friend, and a very slight cautious act gave rise to some suspicion, and before we could fully succeed, our plan was discovered, and we had everything in readiness but the last stone, and we could have made our escape in 1 minute and should have succeeded admirably had it not been for a little imprudence or over anxiety on the part of our friend. The sheriff and jailer did not blame us for our attempt. It was a fine breach and cost the county a round sum, but public opinion says that we ought to have been permitted to have made our escape. So to put this kind of in English, the sheriff saw that they had almost made it out. They had like a stone in their way, and they were almost there. And the sheriff's like, that's a pretty good one. Like, he actually kind of agrees with them. Like, yeah, no, nobody thinks you should be jailed. So I'm sorry I got to take you, but yeah, you almost got it. And that would have been an awesome way to escape. I think that's interesting. But that's not about me. I'm the amateur historian. Footnote 30 for this says, the cost of repairing the breach may have been included in the $480 that Clay County later charged Davis County for interning the Mormon prisoners, since Davis County lacked a jail. So it cost you $480 to breach a jail wall. Take that. The text also gives us, we have tried for a long time to get our lawyers to draw us some petitions to the supreme judges of the state, but they utterly refused. We have examined the law and drawn the petitions ourselves. so that if the supreme judge does not grant us our liberty, he has got to act without cause contrary to honor, evidence, law, or justice. So what does this mean? Footnote 44. On the 15th of March, 1839, the prisoners wrote petitions for writs of habeas corpus with the intent to submit the petitions to the Missouri Supreme Court. Joseph Smith's petition, which was co-signed by several Latter-day Saints and from far west, stated that the petitioners aver that they can disprove every item of testimony that has any tendency of criminality against the prisoner, for they know it themselves, and can bring many others also to prove the same. The statement suggests that the prisoners intended to introduce new witnesses to prove Joseph Smith's innocence. Anyway, further into the letter we get, now, brethren, concerning the places for the location of the saints, we cannot counsel you as we could if we were present with you. And as to the things that are written heretofore, we do not consider them anything very binding. So footnote 59 for this says, after Joseph Smith learned about early negotiations in mid-February, he wrote to church leaders in Quincy expressing support for the purchase. On the 5th of March, Bishop Edward Partridge explained in a letter to Joseph Smith that church leaders were hesitant to make the purchase. And then now that letter changes some tone here. If there are bounds set to the heavens or to the seas or to the dry land or to the sun, moon, or stars, all the times of their revolutions, all their appointed days, months, and years, and all the days of their days, months, and years, and all their glories, laws, and set times shall be revealed in the days of the dispensation of the fullness of times, according to that which was ordained in the midst of the council of the eternal gods or other gods before this world was. Footnote 72 states, this language is reminiscent of Joseph Smith's 1835 translation of Egyptian papyri, in which, quote, the system of astronomy was unfolded, and the formation of the planetary system was explained. In 1835, Grammar and Alphabet of the Egyptian Language contains several references to the moon, the earth, and the sun in their annual revolutions, and God setting bounds on the ocean and the lights of heavens during the creation. So kind of cosmic in the middle of all of this. The letter also relates, and Elder Cahoon, we remember him, but would like to jog his memory a little on the fable of the bear and the two friends who mutually agreed to stand by each other. The heck is that talking about? And did you spell bear wrong? And yes, he did. So footnote 80 for this says, in Aesop's fable of the bear and the two travelers, two men agree to support each other during their travels. When a bear approaches them in the forest, one of the men climbs a tree, leaving his companion to play dead on the ground. The bear sniffs the man on the ground and then leaves him alone. The other man climbs down the tree and asks his friend what the bear told him. The friend replies that the bear advised him to not ever make a journey with friends of this kind. So basically saying, stop being a coward, I guess is what he's saying. Anyway, the letter ends with the signatures of Joseph, Hiram, Caleb Baldwin, Alexander McQueen, Lyman White, and that's how the letter ends. So apologies for that, kind of a brutal portion of church history. And as we get into our last portion here, we're going to be getting into a letter on the 22nd, which contains the rest of section 121, all of 122, and all of 123. Again, this is a very difficult time in the history of the church, but also some very inspiring things come from it as well. So stick around for part 3.